Hey guys, Political Junkie 2414 here, and welcome back to my second to last uh, 2022 Senate slash governor election analysis video. Today we're going to be covering the state of Georgia. And tomorrow, or later today, I'm not exactly sure, I will be covering Pennsylvania Senate and governor's races. And then, yeah, we got no more analysis videos. I could have done more, but I feel like, I need to put out those election nights and I need to, prepare for that because we only have 4 days to go until the 2022 midterms. It's getting very exciting. Going to be a very interesting night to watch how the elections go. But yeah, let's get right into it with my analysis of these two races. So obviously, Georgia has become, Georgia's notorious now for being a swing state, and it was pretty shocking to a lot of people when Joe Biden won the state of Georgia, in 2020. It was not something that was expected. There were, of course, there was a lot of evidence of leftward trends in Georgia over the past, decade, but most analysts, thought that Georgia was going to stay red, and, it didn't. And in some cases, Biden outperformed his polling data. Georgia's polls, though, are usually pretty accurate. And, as we know, Georgia was the Democrats' ace in the hole in, those runoff races 2 years ago, or, almost 2 years ago. But yeah, Georgia, electing John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock was really what gave Democrats, it was what gave Democrats their 50-50 tie in the Senate. And, since they have the vice presidency, they hold a very slim majority, and that is why, the Republican Party is not the favorite in the Senate. But Georgia is being targeted very heavily by the Republicans now, on both the Senate and governor front, more the Senate front, because the governor's race they hold, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Um, and the Republicans, and more specifically Donald Trump, former president, endorsed Herschel Walker, who is, of course, the famous football player who lived in Georgia. He's lived in Texas for in more recent years, but Trump and him have been the two. He and Trump have been longtime friends, and he got persuaded into running for this seat. And for a while it actually looked like he might just run away with this race. As you can see right now, he is favored. He's has a 57% chance of victory, but Warnock's 43% chance is not something to scowl at. It's actually a pretty good showing, all things considered. If you go back to when this forecast started, Walker had a 62% chance of victory. Then over the summer, it really diminished, and then by August, Warnock retook the narrow lead. And more recently, at the beginning of the month, Walker, one of his biggest scandals yet, came out when it was revealed that he paid it for he paid a woman who's not his wife to for an abortion that she did not want. Um, and there's evidence of it. There's his handwriting on a postcard that he sent to her saying "Get well." He's been also accused back. He was accused back in the summer of having multiple children after he said that child abandonment is or fatherless families have been a major problem in the black community when he himself has actually had many kids that he is just not really taking care of. And so he's prompted, that this race has become really nationalized. Georgia, is always going to be nationalized, but Walker's really made this race very, very, interesting. And, the Republicans, it looked really bad for them, going, we can look at the polling average. It looked really, really bad for them when the scandal dropped in mid-October. I mean, Warnock surged to about a 4-point lead. Even Republican pollsters were showing Walker down. And, I had kind of gotten into the mindset, well, okay, Georgia's not going to go to a runoff anymore in the Senate race. If even, Trafalgar and Insider Advantage, which both predicted Trump would win in Georgia in 2020 by a comfortable amount, if they're both saying that Walker is losing, I mean, well, it's done. And I mean, I never said that Walker didn't have a chance to come back. But I kind of said, look, he looks like he's screwed. And Georgia's early voting numbers have looked really good for Democrats. They're outpacing their 2020 numbers. Warnock is very good with turning out the black vote in, the Atlanta suburbs. But recently, the lead, has diminished pretty much for Warnock. It's become extremely, extremely close. And Walker actually had like an extremely narrow advantage just a day ago, but now it's pretty much back to a statistical tie with Warnock being very slightly above Walker. And so, I do believe that Georgia is going to see another Senate runoff. I do believe that, with 4 days left to go, I think, that it's more likely than not that we will see December runoff between Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker. And what, is there's some good news and bad news to that for both parties. The good news for the Democrats is that Republican turnout was pretty bad in the Georgia runoffs in 2021. That may have had to do with Trump, really, pushing the idea that the election was stolen, and so a lot of voters in the rural areas and maybe some Republican voters in the suburbs didn't really want to turn out, because they thought that their vote wouldn't matter. And so, you can see that Ossoff and Warnock defeated David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler by larger margins than Biden did Trump. And yeah, you can see that Georgia was a lean blue state, and that was, pretty surprising. It was, this was the ace in the hole for Democrats. And so, with, Democrats having, this pretty good showing in the runoffs last year, one would think that, a runoff system would be, pretty favorable to them. And, I still argue that it is, but I think also Georgia really, the runoff really depends on how the rest of the country goes. If the Senate is already decided in favor of the GOP or the Democrats, I think that that could lower turnout and that could hurt both parties because if the because if Georgia doesn't decide the Senate majority, you're probably going to see a lower turnout number. And, I think that that could hurt Warnock since Democrats typically do better with, or do worse when turnout is lower. But, look at Virginia in 2021. Youngkin won the election. The governor race had 55% turnout, much higher than it was in 2017. And Glenn Youngkin won that race. Now that was mostly Republican turnout, but still, you can see the turnout is not always as the major indicator of how the races, um, you know, um, turn out. And so I do have Georgia right now as a toss-up, but I would, in my personal projections, if you guys saw my Senate vid a couple of days ago, you saw that I put it in the tilt Democratic column. I stand by that. I think that, Georgia's polls being pretty accurate. I think that Walker has a very, very good chance. Echelon Insights, which is a very left-wing pollster, does have Walker up, but that may be compensating for, having, overestimated Democrats in the past. But you can see that there are still reputable pollsters that show Warnock ahead. Survey USA, which was, I think, only a point off in 2020, has Warnock up by 6. Marist College, which does use registered voters, which are more Democratic leaning, has Warnock up by 4. Remington Research Group is a little bit more right leaning. I don't know if they are or not, but they have Walker up by 4. So you can see it's pretty much, just a guessing game. Emerson College, which thought that Trump would win Georgia in 2020, has Warnock up by 2 and a 50% of the vote. So it really this race really could go either way, but I think that the runoff system, in the general scheme of things, does help the Democrats. I think that if the Senate control does go to the GOP without Georgia, if Georgia's not, or if Democrats win it, the Senate majority without Georgia, I think that that could hurt their chances because Republicans, especially if it's if the GOP does win the Senate outright on election night. I do think that that could, hurt Democratic turnout, but at the same time, Democrats will have plenty, will have a whole month to invest their resources in it. Warnock's already getting a ton of money. He's really, he's self-fundraising his campaign, I believe. Double check me if I'm wrong. He's no Mark Kelly, but you know what I mean. You know, Georgia has been really, focused on by both parties, and I do think that Herschel Walker is going to alienate some voters in the rural areas. Not necessarily that they'll vote for Warnock, but I do think that it is going to cause some of them to just not turn out to vote for Walker, just skip that and vote in the governor's race for Brian Kemp, which we're going to talk about in just a second. There's also a libertarian candidate on the ballot. And a libertarian is what caused, that the Senate race between Ossoff and Perdue last time to go to a runoff. And I do think that that's what's going to happen this time. So yeah, I do think that we will have a December 6th runoff. Walker and Warnock will probably not get over 50% on election day, but I do lean towards Warnock winning that runoff and winning, the primary and winning the general election vote. If you go back to 2008, this is another example. Democrats had a very big sweep nationwide, yet they lost the Georgia runoff by 15 points, and, Georgia was a lot redder, back in 2008, but still, Jim Martin did a lot worse than he did in the general election against Saxby Chambliss. So, I don't think that voter enthusiasm is the best indicator sometimes of what happens in Georgia, and I do think that Warnock does still have a very good shot. I think both candidates have pretty much a 50-50 shot at winning, but I would narrowly lean on the side of the Democratic Party. So now, after that, let's go and talk about the governor's race. And this is where the Georgia races get really interesting because there's a clear ticket split happening here. So as you can see, there's a lot of a difference here. Brian Kemp, the incumbent Republican governor who won back in 2018, is going up against Democrat Stacey Abrams, who's famous for her voter activism. She helped flip the state blue in 2020. She came very close to beating Kemp in 2018. She actually outran her polls. She was supposed to lose by, I think, 3 points. She only lost by one. There was a little bit of controversy here whether or not, there was confirmation that Kemp may have, that Kemp did, as Secretary of State at that time, manipulate some of the results. Not I'm not going to get into it and give my personal opinion on that, but there was some clear voter suppression in Georgia. Some people claim that that's what cost Abrams the election. Again, I'm not going to get into that because I know election denialism is dangerous either way. And so, and Georgia now has a new voter registration law, or a new voter suppression law in place that Kemp signed, which basically says that um, it basically prohibits voters in line being passed out a bottle of water, which I think is ridiculous. But as you can see, Kemp is in a much better place than Walker. Abrams only has a 7% chance at victory, and you can see that the runoff system is where she does the best. And the runoff system is, I think what could turn this race around. But you can see in a lot of these polls, the same polls that have Warnock winning or Walker winning narrowly, when you see a very close Senate race, you see that Kemp is clearly ahead in a lot of these pollsters. And on the 538 polling average, he's up by almost 8 points. He's at nearly 52% of the vote. Abrams is doing a lot worse than she was in 2018. Now, Georgia's a very racially polarized state, and what I mean by that is there's a lot, most of the black voters vote heavily Democratic, most of the white voters vote heavily Republican, and the suburban areas around Atlanta are becoming blacker and more Democratic, which has helped the state shift blue. But there's a clear difference here. There's a clear ticket split happening in Georgia. Even the most democratic of pollsters, are still showing a Brian Kemp lead, and most of them are showing that he's avoiding a runoff in most of these situations. Now, I think that the runoff is really what could change this race. If Kemp does not reach 50% on election day, which I do think is possible, I do think that Abrams, has a much better shot in a runoff, but I still would caution against it. I think that, Kemp refusing to overturned the 2020 election results in Georgia per Donald Trump's command. Not like he's like some supreme leader. He's far from a supreme leader. But what I mean by that is Trump basically demanded that Kemp would not certify the results in Georgia, which is a state that Trump lost. And I think that that's helped them with suburban voters. You can see also, from campaign insiders for Abrams, that black men are not really showing up, or not turning out as heavily to vote for her as they are for Raphael Warnock, which could explain some, of this divide between them. But I think, Georgia, while it's not necessarily a ticket splitting state, if you go back to the 2016 presidential results, yes, Georgia was red but only by 5 points. It went from voting for Romney by 8 to Trump by 5 to Biden by less than a quarter of a point. But let's look at the Senate race in 2016. Johnny Isaacson, who in his own right was to be to be fair, he was a very strong candidate for Georgia, and he won. He was able to win by very large amounts, and God rest his soul because he passed away last year. But he won by 14 points in 2016. So you can see a lot of these suburban counties. that have now become Democratic, Isaacson won. You can see that he did very, very well, and that there was a clear, ticket split in the state of Georgia. And I think that Kemp, being someone who is perceived as more moderate, who has a record, and, while a lot of voters may, like Abrams or may, just be kind of iffy about Kemp, a lot of them are saying, he has a record, he has something, to show. Abrams, I think, is a great candidate, and I'm endorsing both Warnock and Abrams. But at the end of the day, but at the end of the day, Georgia, I think, is a likely red state. I've had it as lean red recently. And we'll get to that in my final governor prediction. But the polls in Georgia have historically been very accurate. They predicted a Biden victory by election day, 2020. You saw that Warnock and Ossoff were supposed to win the Senate runoffs, and I think that it's kind of naive to say, you know, that the same polls that are showing Warnock and Walker in a dead heat, most of the time with Democrats winning in the Senate race, to just discount the same, side of these polls that show Brian Kemp leading. I don't think that that's smart. I don't think that it's right. I think, Abrams has a shot for a runoff system, but honestly, I'm not too confident. It's not necessarily, because I have no faith in her to win this race. I hope she does. I'm not, like a Brian Kemp stan here talking to you. I, support Abrams as much as, as much as most people can, but I, recognize that we have to be objective with this, and we have to understand that these numbers are not looking good for her. And Brian Kemp looks like he's on a pretty good track, on a pretty good path to re-election on Tuesday. And I could see him potentially running for the U.S. Senate against John Ossoff in 2026 and perhaps winning that Senate seat. We'll have to see about Herschel Walker winning in Georgia. Again, I think that Georgia's a toss-up, but tilting Democratic. But I think Brian Kemp, is a very strong candidate, and, Abrams has run into a lot of problems. I think that, if you look at past history, candidates who have been, nominees for state offices, statewide office before, when they run again, they typically don't do too well. They might outperform their old performance, and there are exceptions. But, ask Russ Feingold in 2016. Let me think. What are some other examples of repeat candidates not doing too well? I need to think. Uh, well, basically, I'll talk about Russ Feingold, in Wisconsin. I mean, you guys already know. I'm not going to tell you too much about him. You can see Evan Bayh didn't do too well against Todd Young in 2016. He got it under 10%, but it was still no victory, like he had in the past. You can see that, there are a lot of instances, when Democrats or Republicans, who run for the same office after, winning beforehand, they typically don't do as well. And I think that that's, part of voter enthusiasm. They're a lot of people might be like, oh, well, this person's already ran, or they may not have the same energy. And I think that that is part of what's happening to Stacey Abrams. It's more complex than that. And I could be wrong about this race, but I don't think I'm going to be. I think that Kemp wins outright on election day, and Georgia's Senate race goes to a runoff, which I do believe Warnock will narrowly win, but that is not at all guaranteed. So, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Sorry if it was really long, but yeah, we're going to get to the final state of Pennsylvania in both the Senate race and governor's race soon. I will be releasing my Senate election prediction, on my final one on Monday, my final House prediction, and governor's prediction within the next couple of days. And I'll release at the very least my Senate election night slideshow video where I'll do basically the election night thing where I go through all the races and make it like you would see it on a national television, on our national television channel. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Share it. Turn on notifications so you don't miss another one of my videos. Check out my channel, Interactor127, and my second channel, Political Junkie 2414. Or yeah, well this is Political Junkie 2414. Also check out my comrade Growlings of 666, who will hopefully be getting back to YouTube soon. And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time when I talk about all things politics. See ya.